Human Rights and Articles 1 and 27 of the International Covenant on a right of unilateral secession. Can a province like Alberta, Saskatchewan, or Quebec separate from Canada? Do these provinces own the natural resources of these provinces? The answer to that is no. This is why. While secession with the consent of the metropolitan state is a right rarely challenged, the alleged right of unilateral secession under international law is laden with controversy. In the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples, adopted by the General Assembly in 1960, Section 6, it is stated that any attempt aimed at the partial or total disruption of the national unity and the territorial integrity of a country is incompatible with the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations. This paragraph undoubtedly rejects a right of secession, but the formulation is subsequently restricted in the Friendly Relations Declaration, adopted by the General Assembly in 1970. Principle 5, Section 7 of the Friendly Relations Declaration protects the territorial integrity of states, conducting themselves in compliance with the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples, representing the whole people belonging to the territory without distinction as to race, creed, or color. The aforementioned formulation is basically repeated in Article 1 of the 1993 Vienna Declaration and in Article 1 of the Declaration on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the United Nations, adopted in 1995, hereafter 50th Anniversary Declaration. An obvious conclusion drawn from the provision is that territorial integrity is not guaranteed in a case in which a state does not respect the right to self-determination of peoples, discriminating a subgroup through denying its right to internal self-determination. The territorial integrity of states is limited through its own non-compliance with the right to self-determination of peoples. As determined above, the provision is directed towards states, which means that the dismemberment or impairment of state territorial integrity refers to actions of other states. The international community could thereby legally take action if a state grossly violates the internal dimension of self-determination. Such action taken by the international community can be aid or recognition of independence of the discriminated seceding entity, which would otherwise be perceived as illicit. An act of secession may then be authorized or encouraged by other states. Numerous scholars have argued that the provision entails a right for so-called remedial secession, a right for peoples to secede under certain circumstances as a last resort, as an ultimum remedium. In a situation in which a state deliberately and sustainably discriminates a part of the population and does thus not represent the whole population, the right to self-determination would, if not remedial secession was included, be a hollow shell for the entity in question. The possibility of a right to remedial secession implicitly been acknowledged in several judicial decisions which are explored below. Merzweig, page 24. World Conference on Human Rights, Vienna Declaration and Program of Action, 12th of July 1993. UN Doc, UFCON 57-23, ILM 1661. 1993 Vienna Declaration. UNGA Declaration on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the United Nations Res. 56, 9th November 1995, 50th Session, UN Doc A 5048, 50th Anniversary Declaration. Johansson, page 70. It cannot be use of force other than through the decision of the UN Security Council. See Johansson, page 123. Oder, page 114. Principle Vive, Section 7 Friendly Relations Declaration, Art 1, 2. 1993 Vienna Declaration and Art 1, 3, 50th Anniversary Declaration. See example Buchheit, pages 2 and 21 to 23, Cassis, page 118, Anderson, pages 358 to 368. Merzweig, 26. It is clear and practically beyond dispute that the right to self-determination of peoples does not contain an unconditional right of secession. Oder. Supreme Court of Canada, reference Resecession of Quebec, 1998, Canli 793, 1998, 2 SCR 217. Quebec could not, despite a clear referendum result, purport to invoke a right of self-determination to dictate the terms of a proposed secession to the other parties to the Federation. The democratic vote, by however strong a majority, would have no legal effect on its own, and could not push aside the principles of federalism and the rule of law, the rights of individuals and minorities, or the operation of democracy in the other provinces or in Canada as a whole. Democratic rights under the Constitution cannot be divorced from constitutional obligations. Nor, however, can the reverse proposition be accepted. The continued existence and operation of the Canadian constitutional order could not be indifferent to a clear expression of a clear majority of Quebecers that they no longer wish to remain in Canada. The other provinces and the federal government would have no basis to deny the right of the government of Quebec to pursue secession should a clear majority of the people of Quebec choose that goal, so long as in doing so, Quebec respects the rights of others. The negotiations that followed such a vote would address the potential act of secession as well as its possible terms should in fact secession proceed. There would be no conclusions predetermined by law on any issue. Negotiations would need to address the interests of the other provinces, the federal government and Quebec, and indeed the rights of all Canadians both within and outside Quebec, and specifically the rights of minorities. The negotiation process would require the reconciliation of various rights and obligations by negotiation between two legitimate majorities, namely, the majority of the population of Quebec and that of Canada as a whole. A political majority at either level that does not act in accordance with the underlying constitutional principles puts at risk the legitimacy of its exercise of its rights and the ultimate acceptance of the result by the international community. The court was also required to consider whether a right to unilateral secession exists under international law. Some supporting an affirmative answer did so on the basis of the recognized right to self-determination that belongs to all peoples. Although much of the Quebec population certainly shares many of the characteristics of a people, it is not necessary to decide the people issue because, whatever may be the correct determination of this issue in the context of Quebec, a right to secession only arises under the principle of self-determination of people at international law, where a people is governed as part of a colonial empire, where a people is subject to alien subjugation, domination, or exploitation, and possibly where a people is denied any meaningful exercise of its right to self-determination within the state of which it forms a part. In other circumstances, peoples are expected to achieve self-determination within the framework of their existing state. A state whose government represents the whole of the people or peoples resident within its territory on a basis of equality and without discrimination, and respects the principles of self-determination in its internal arrangements, is entitled to maintain its territorial integrity under international law and to have that territorial integrity recognized by other states. Quebec does not meet the threshold of a colonial people or an oppressed people, nor can it be suggested that Quebecers have been denied meaningful access to government to pursue their political, economic, cultural, and social development. In the circumstances, the National Assembly, the legislature, or the government of Quebec do not enjoy a right at international law to effect the secession of Quebec from Canada unilaterally. Secession means separation of provinces or territories. If Quebec cannot separate from Canada or Catalan from Spain, then neither can Alberta. The premiers do not have final say over their provinces, nor does Alberta or Saskatchewan own the oil or any minerals, etc. All resources in Canada belong to all Canadians and Indigenous peoples. Let me repeat, at international law, it is clear and practically beyond dispute that the right to self-determination of peoples does not contain an unconditional right of secession. At international law, states are countries. Provinces are not countries. All Canadians, plus all Indigenous peoples of Canada, even the Indigenous in the USA, would have to say yes, and only then could it be done. But why would any of us allow that to ever happen? Together, we the people own it all. No Prime Minister or Premier has any rights to our resources within the whole of Canada since 1982. There are other reasons why separation of a province or territory cannot legally happen within Canada or internationally, but these are the most relevant. Our official decolonization, April 17, 1982, at UK, Canadian, and international law, made the peoples of Canada the official political and civil rights holders over our government and country. However, the federal and provincial leaders failed to announce it and give us our legal and lawful rights as determined and specified by international law. The provinces should have been trading equally within Canada without provincial borders. To steal our rights, they perpetrated the lies by remaining the same as if we were still run as colonies by illegally circumventing our collective rights. Statutes of Canada 2000. Summary. The purpose of this enactment is to give effect to the requirement for clarity set out in the opinion of the Supreme Court of Canada in the Quebec secession reference. The enactment provides for the House of Commons to determine the clarity of a referendum question on the secession of a province and sets out some of the factors to be considered in making its determination. It prohibits the Government of Canada from entering into negotiations on the terms on which a province might cease to be part of Canada if the House of Commons determines that the referendum question is not clear. The enactment also provides for the House of Commons to determine, following a referendum on secession in a province, if a clear majority of the population of the province has clearly expressed a will to cease to be a part of Canada and sets out the factors to be considered in making its determination. It prohibits the Government of Canada from entering into negotiations with the province unless a clear majority has clearly expressed its will to secede. Lastly, the enactment recognizes that the secession of a province from Canada requires an amendment to the Constitution of Canada, which in turn requires negotiations involving all provincial governments and the Government of Canada, and it also provides that certain matters must be addressed in negotiations before a constitutional amendment is proposed by a Minister of the Crown. An act to give effect to the requirement for clarity as set out in the opinion of the Supreme Court of Canada in the Quebec secession reference, assented to 29th June. Whereas the Supreme Court of Canada has confirmed that there is no right under international law or under the Constitution of Canada for the National Assembly, Legislature, or Government of Quebec to effect the secession of Quebec from Canada unilaterally. Whereas any proposal relating to the breakup of a democratic state is a matter of the utmost gravity, and is of fundamental importance to all of its citizens. Whereas the government of any province of Canada is entitled to consult its population by referendum on any issue and is entitled to formulate the wording of its referendum question. Whereas the Supreme Court of Canada has determined that the result of a referendum on the secession of a province from Canada must be free of ambiguity, both in terms of the question asked and in terms of the support it achieves, if that result is to be taken as an expression of the democratic will that would give rise to an obligation to enter into negotiations that might lead to secession. Whereas the Supreme Court of Canada has stated that democracy means more than simple majority rule, that a clear majority in favor of secession would be required to create an obligation to negotiate secession, and that a qualitative evaluation is required to determine whether a clear majority in favor of secession exists in the circumstances. Whereas the Supreme Court of Canada has confirmed that in Canada, the secession of a province, to be lawful, would require an amendment to the Constitution of Canada, that such an amendment would perforce require negotiations in relation to secession involving at least the governments of all of the provinces and the Government of Canada, and that those negotiations would be governed by the principles of federalism, democracy, constitutionalism, and the rule of law, and the protection of minorities. Whereas, in light of the finding by the Supreme Court of Canada that it would be for elected representatives to determine what constitutes a clear question and what constitutes a clear majority in a referendum held in a province on secession, the House of Commons, as the only political institution elected to represent all Canadians, has an important role in identifying what constitutes a clear question and a clear majority sufficient for the Government of Canada to enter into negotiations in relation to the secession of a province from Canada. And whereas it is incumbent on the Government of Canada not to enter into negotiations that might lead to the secession of a province from Canada, and that could consequently entail the termination of citizenship and other rights that Canadian citizens resident in the province enjoy as full participants in Canada, unless the population of that province has clearly expressed its democratic will that the province secede from Canada. Now, therefore, Her Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate and House of Commons of Canada, enacts as follows. 1. The House of Commons shall, within 30 days after the government of a province tables in its legislative assembly, or otherwise officially releases the question that it intends to submit to its voters in a referendum relating to the proposed secession of the province from Canada, consider the question and by resolution set out its determination on whether the question is clear. 2. Where the 30 days referred to in subsection 1 occur, in whole or in part, during a general election of members to serve in the House of Commons, the 30 days shall be extended by an additional 40 days. In considering the clarity of a referendum question, the House of Commons shall consider whether the question would result in a clear expression of the will of the population of a province on whether the province should cease to be part of Canada and become an independent state. 4. For the purpose of subsection 3, a clear expression of the will of the population of a province that the province cease to be part of Canada could not result from a referendum question that merely focuses on a mandate to negotiate without soliciting a direct expression of the will of the population of that province on whether the province should cease to be part of Canada, or b. a referendum question that envisages other possibilities in addition to the secession of the province from Canada, such as economic or political arrangements with Canada, that obscure a direct expression of the will of the population of that province on whether the province should cease to be part of Canada. 5. In considering the clarity of a referendum question, the House of Commons shall take into account the views of all political parties represented in the Legislative Assembly of the province whose government is proposing the referendum on secession, any formal statements or resolutions by the government or Legislative Assembly of any province or territory of Canada, any formal statements or resolutions by the Senate, any formal statements or resolutions by the representatives of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada, especially those in the province whose government is proposing the referendum on secession, and any other views it considers to be relevant. The Government of Canada shall not enter into negotiations on the terms on which a province might cease to be part of Canada if the House of Commons determines, pursuant to this section, that a referendum question is not clear, and, for that reason, would not result in a clear expression of the will of the population of that province on whether the province should cease to be part of Canada. Where the government of a province, following a referendum relating to the secession of the province from Canada, seeks to enter into negotiations on the terms on which that province might cease to be part of Canada, the House of Commons shall, except where it has determined pursuant to Section 1 that a referendum question is not clear, consider and by resolution set out its determination on whether, in the circumstances, there has been a clear expression of a will by a clear majority of the population of that province that the province cease to be part of Canada. 2. In considering whether there has been a clear expression of a will by a clear majority of the population of a province that the province cease to be part of Canada, the House of Commons shall take into account a. The size of the majority of valid votes cast in favor of the secessionist option, b. The percentage of eligible voters voting in the referendum, and any other matters or circumstances it considers to be relevant. 3. In considering whether there has been a clear expression of a will by a clear majority of the population of a province that the province cease to be part of Canada, the House of Commons shall take into account the views of all political parties represented in the Legislative Assembly of the province whose government proposed the referendum on secession. Any formal statements or resolutions by the government or Legislative Assembly of any province or territory of Canada, any formal statements or resolutions by the Senate, any formal statements or resolutions by the representatives of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada, especially those in the province whose government proposed the referendum on secession, and any other views it considers to be relevant. The Government of Canada shall not enter into negotiations on the terms on which a province might cease to be part of Canada unless the House of Commons determines, pursuant to this section, that there has been a clear expression of a will by a clear majority of the population of that province that the province cease to be part of Canada. 1. It is recognized that there is no right under the Constitution of Canada to effect the secession of a province from Canada unilaterally, and that, therefore, an amendment to the Constitution of Canada would be required for any province to secede from Canada, which in turn would require negotiations involving at least the governments of all of the provinces and the Government of Canada. 2. No Minister of the Crown shall propose a constitutional amendment to effect the secession of a province from Canada unless the Government of Canada has addressed, in its negotiations, the terms of secession that are relevant in the circumstances, including the division of assets and liabilities, any changes to the borders of the province, the rights, interests, and territorial claims of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada, and the protection of minority rights. The people as the collective head of state. Constitutional Referendum 1982 to 2024 Binding Living Document. November 3, 2024. Referendum Objective. The Canadian government has had an obligation to hold a nationwide constitutional referendum for its citizens, predating the Canada Act 1982 request by the Parliament and Senate to the United Kingdom, which only partially patriated the Constitution on April 17, 1982. The UK Commonwealth Foreign Affairs stated that due to the government not having held a referendum prior to the constitutional patriation from the UK, the Imperial Parliament could not proceed, as Trudeau had hoped, with the patriation. Instead, Pierre Elliott Trudeau was obliged to accept post-patriation amendments that have yet to be fulfilled 42 years later, and kept it from the people to this day. Constitutional amendments can only be accepted by the Imperial Parliament in accordance with the wishes of the people of the Dominion as a whole, not at either federal or provincial bidding. Decolonization, patriation of the 1982 constitutional coup d'état, should have given complete independence and the full power to the people to choose what we decide together in regard to our own country. This was never finalized and served as a parliamentary and provincial inside coup d'état against the peoples of Canada. This coup d'état was further extended as of April 17, 1997, to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and now to His Majesty King Charles III as Canada's heads of state. Therefore, the Canadian people hold the prerogative to rectify the purported 1982 coup d'état, which allegedly undermined the constitutional patriation of the Canada Act 1982, orchestrated by Pierre Elliott Trudeau's Liberal government, Parliament, Senate, and the provincial premiers. The Canadian government enacted the legislation without securing a mandatory referendum from affected Canadians regarding keeping the monarchy or the Canada Act 1982. Because we were not given a referendum on these issues and on how we wanted to govern ourselves, the Canada Act 1982 was enforced without our consent, thus maintaining the Crown and Parliament's supremacy over the people. Foreseeing democracy, parliamentary democracy, as the only legitimate outcome cannot truly be considered a free act of self-determination. The Canadian government has repeatedly violated the international legal instruments it pledged to uphold, undermining the rights and dignity of all Canadians. Regrettably, previous governments have also committed numerous human rights abuses since 1982, with the situation worsening significantly in the past 4 years. In a statement made during the parliamentary meetings, Sir B. Brain stated that the Canada Bill sent to the UK by the Canadian government that certain parts of the Charter breached the international agreements that both Canada and the UK had ratified. There is much more shocking information within the Hansards that indicates that a coup d'état was committed against us by our own government and by every other government for the past 42 years since. The evidence suggests a systematic undermining of democratic processes by governmental authorities over the past 4 decades. See discussions in UK Parliament regarding Canada Bill 1982, Canada Bill Hansard. UK House of Commons Debate 17 February 1982, Volume 18 CC 292-373. My honourable friend, the member for Essex South East, Sir B. Brain, has shown clearly and cogently how certain parts of that charter offend and infringe 2 international agreements to which we are signatories, Article 17 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Articles 1 and 27 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Some of us may not wish to be signatories to those 2 agreements, but we are bound by them. So long as we choose to be fettered by those covenants, they remain shackles upon the House, and we should recoil from any legislation that infringes upon them. To do otherwise would be dishonorable, even disreputable. It is of course true that Canada is also a signatory to both agreements, but whether she decides to infringe them is not a matter for us. 2 wrongs cannot make a right. The Indian nations are justified in questioning the bona fides of the Canadian Prime Minister. I say that with great regret. As long ago as 1969, he spoke in Vancouver about the need to bring to an end the historic treaty rights of the Indian peoples, and spoke of how in due course those rights must be extinguished. He refuses even now to sit at the conference table to discuss and define what those rights are. He will not do so until the new Constitution of Canada is established, and at that stage, he will have the power to override the Indians. That is our dilemma. We do not wish to offend Canada, but if we pass the bill in its present form, we shall infringe 2 international agreements and at the same time disregard the rights of the Indian nations given under 83 treaties between them and the British sovereign. For that reason, I shall find it difficult to support the bill. People's referendum purpose. This referendum is a legally binding living agreement between the signatories to achieve the required 51% of Canadians being in agreement with this referendum within a minimum of 7 provinces to reach a fair majority of our citizens. This referendum is to be combined in conjunction with the Indigenous and Civil Unified Sovereign Enactment, Citizens' Convention of Consent to Collective Self-Determination and Self-Governance, within a combined direct democracy system of governance. This means that all the citizens of Canada and the Indigenous nations would have to agree in 2 countrywide referendums to decide if Alberta can separate from Canada. If this isn't clear enough, I don't know what it will take for Canadians to awaken to our reality as being the true co-owners and shareholders of Canada as a whole since 1982. If Canadians and the Indigenous nations could suddenly awaken to this factual reality, instead of the fiction created by the political parties, the provincial and federal governments that allow them to remain in power over the people instead, realizing that we, the people of Canada, are actually the true collective head of state within the international decolonization process that transpired at Parliament Hill, April 17, 1982. Therefore, and as consistently stated by the Canadian People's Union, the CPU, Power Shift to Freedom movement, will always continue to claim that any talk of separation from Canada is a ploy to keep all Canadians and Indigenous peoples stuck in useless debates and chaos while the governments continue to lie to us about our true rights. What Alberta is brewing with the Conservatives and Liberals is a clear example of it. Neither party acts for the people. The Conservatives placed our assets and resources into deep USA economic integration of our resources through NAFTA and the Security Prosperity Partnership, agreements between Canada, the USA, and Mexico, created the North American Union, otherwise known as the NAU. The plan was written by Robert Pastor and John Manley. During the meetings, said that a central bank had to be created in the US and that the resources from Canada would back this trilateral central bank. Apparently, the governor of the Bank of Canada was so furious that he left the talks. Soon after, Stephen Harper replaced the governor of the Bank of Canada by Mark Carney as the new governor of the bank. Mark Carney then left to become the governor of the Bank of England.
So, while Adam Smith was famously cautious about the role of the state, he recognized that it should furnish the rules and conditions within which private innovation can flourish. In the monetary sphere, this means providing money which citizens can use with confidence and ease. And the Bank of England delivers just that, from the quality of our banknotes to the stability of our inflation, the resilience of our financial system, and the efficiency and reliability of our core payment system. As we do so, we're overhauling that core payment system, RTGS, so that private innovation can flourish. And by bringing crypto assets onto a level regulatory playing field, we can help catalyze a more resilient, effective, and innovative payment system. With all of these foundations in place, the scene is set for better payments, a better economy, and a better Friday night out.
And now, Mark Carney is the Liberal Prime Minister of Canada who worked on the CBDC, now crypto, implementation at the World Economic Forum. This was part of the SPP supported by Stephen Harper and his Conservatives. Please read Building the North American Union, then change to Creating a North American Community, Chairman's Statement from an Independent Task Force on the Future of North America. Monday, March 14, 2005. The plan of the North American Union also laid the seeds of the CBDC cryptocurrency, then called the Amero, which, as the truth becomes exposed, we can connect to Bitcoin, which was finally launched in China under a bogus Chinese identity. The reality we see today, when all the dots are connected, is that since 1971, the USA ran into deep debts. This is when the oligarchs obviously agreed to create money out of thin air, based on the US dollar, since the US Federal Reserve sold US Treasury bonds in excess of the amount backed by gold. Now they would simply sell Treasury bonds backed by the US dollar. This did not help the US. They did not learn from 1971 to get out of debt. Instead, they fell deeper into chaos and more debt. Then came more lies, manipulation, and more cover-ups to remain as the world's superpower. The USA only owned 5% of the gold held at Fort Knox. This was another reason why the United Nations is located in the USA. All other gold was held there for protection on behalf of the other countries' recuperated gold, which most had been stolen by Hitler, while they focused on rebuilding their countries after World War II. This gold would also be left at Fort Knox as security for the billions of dollars the U.S. had loaned to them for the rebuilding countries, while they had to agree to also allow the U.S. to build military bases in their regions. When looking back to problems of the United States being broke due to their overselling of treasury bonds, backed by gold becoming due in 1971, then the USD Treasury bonds, depending on the maturity dates, have further created hardships in economic uncertainty or collapses in 1999, 2008 to 2025. Because of more overspending, the U.S. had to come up with another plan to circumvent the failing of the U.S. dollar and Treasury, since countries were beginning to demand the repayment of the U.S. debt owed to them, such as China, Japan, the UK, and other countries as shown in the U.S. debt chart. As in 1971, the oligarchs, though they're private corporations and banks, had to create another guarantee to secure the oligarchs' wealth via the World Economic Forum. Hence the U.S. luring Canada and Mexico in creating the North American Union, deep economic integration, and changing our global monetary system that would incorporate a digital currency CBDC, first branded as the Amero and now crypto, that could be regulated to enable the complete control of humanity through a social credit system.
Foreign trade is the key to prosperity. Free trade will bring on a Great Depression.
The North American Union is the merger of the United States, Mexico, and Canada into one super country.
I don't see the likelihood of establishing a North American Union in our lifetimes.
The road to North American Union is not a new development.
Canadians are saying no to the North American Union and yes to Canada's sovereignty.
The discussion here, and certainly I've been part of it and an advocate of it in a way, is that Canada, the U.S. should seek to have a deeper type of integration with more predictable rules.
Our economies now are very integrated. Our societies are growing increasingly integrated. What's needed now is a North American idea for all three.
What kind of stuff was discussed at this meeting regarding the future of North America?
I don't remember exactly.
There are clear economic benefits from having a common currency.
And he said himself there will be our North American Union, a one North American currency called the Amero.
I am a staunch Canadian nationalist because of globalism.
It's essentially the centralization of power into fewer hands. Canadians, Americans, and Mexicans will lose their sovereignty.
Maybe national sovereignty is not such a good thing. I don't buy into the conspiracy theories around meetings.
Do not be embarrassed. Do not be shy. Who cares if they call you conspiracy theorists? This is the truth.
You get political change of fundamental nature of this sort only if you have a real big earth-shaking event.
It's not going to stop with the North American Union. It's going to be one further step along the road to one world government.
One world government?
Yeah.
I personally think it will come. It will come.
This is where we see the birth of the Bitcoin being implemented in China. The exposure cryptocurrencies backed by the U.S. Treasury's Bitcoins, we can clearly see who actually created and owned it as other U.S. Bitcoin whale investors such as the Bank of America, J.P. Morgan, among others, the tech bros and Peter Thiel, Palantir, fintech and corporations like BlackRock. Now it becomes obvious that the USA government's and the oligarchy's actions were undertaken in order to maintain their control and personal wealth over and beyond the reach of the American people, Canadians, and the peoples of all countries worldwide. To pull this off, Those who control the US and Canadian politicians in government, such as the Israeli lobby, Elon Musk, the tech bros, the bankers, and the World Economic Forum, needed to acquire presidents, such as the Trump and Biden presidencies, to implement their plans through hypocrisy and deceit against the American and Canadian people by removing all powers that would protect the people against total domination. The oligarchs made the right moves to entice the people into demanding change that would render them to become so desperate, therefore making the mistake by choosing a pathological liar like Trump to become their president for a second term. Even if Kamala Harris or Pierre Poilievre would have won, the end game was the same. Two parties to confuse the masses through pandemic and wokeness chaos, just like the Liberals and Conservatives here in Canada. It is pitiful that those in Alberta and in any other province claim to want to separate from Canada, or those wanting to have their province or Canada as the USA's 51st state. These people are obviously oblivious to the wealth they all possess as Canada's true shareholders and co-owners of our country as a whole. If they think that all will be rosy in the US for them, they are sadly mistaken. Those who think this way have not done their research or learned anything worthwhile about our country, let alone the USA. They seem to only focus on the corruption of our politicians and our governments without trying to implement a logical legal solution. They just want to hightail it by running away with our land and resources and to hide behind Trump's MAGA cult. Therefore, until the cowards in Canada know enough about our country, how it was created, its history, and what transpired in 1982 then, they have nothing to discuss that is worth listening to, or let alone support a separation from Canada, which is wasted time and energy based on lies from corrupt or misleading politicians and uninformed, misleading lawyers and justices throughout Canada. While political leaders keep creating unfounded chaos through lies and deception, we, the 80% of the true patriotic Canadians, will legally fight tooth and nail to protect our country from any country who threatens us, or any citizens wanting to separate or annex Canada or their province as the 51st state. Those who want to run from Canada can simply pack their bags and leave the country. No one is holding them here. True patriots would never give away their country or resources to another country or another government to control. Those in the know realize the wealth this vast country has. This wealth belongs to all Canadians and Indigenous peoples, and not the federal or provincial governments. We the people, and not King Charles, Queen Elizabeth, or our governments, are the true legal owners of Canada, once we legally, lawfully correct the lies of the 1982 patriation of our Constitution and correct the true decolonization of our country from the United Kingdom. The fraud created against us by Pierre Trudeau, the 10 provincial premiers, and the parliamentarians was continuously perpetrated by each of the following governments at both the federal and provincial levels of Canadian governance of the last 43 years. The oligarch will always control our governments if we, the people, do not take our rightful places as the collective heads of state in each of our countries. To enact the further destruction of the American and Canadian people and our rights worldwide is an international coup d'etat against us all. If we, the people in all countries, do not legally rise the proper way, then our last chance at true freedom and control of our own destiny as a whole will disappear, and we will never become completely informed enough to plan our families' and country's future so that we can work better together in our country. We must also work in coordination with all the countries in order to instill a more peaceful time in the evolution, or our planet's destiny will be lost forever. The choice is in the hands of every single person in their country. It's not only nuclear war we need to fear, it's the lies our governments have generated. We as a people can end the lies and total control over our lives created by our government. We need all of you who love and believe in our country to achieve success in cleansing the mess our governments have created in stealing our rights. If you want real change and to succeed, then it is up to every one of us to do it, and not wait on a savior for the sake of our country and children. Although not separate, the Democrats and Republican in the US, and as the Liberals and Conservatives in Canada, each had their agendas in the creation and implementation of the COVID and woke mass psychosis effects to enable and instill their final global governance strategies. Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, Benjamin Netanyahu, Pierre Poilievre, Stephen Harper, Justin Trudeau, Chrystia Freeland, and Mark Carney, the crypto CBDC environmentalist central banker, are their final pawns. No country was spared since 1971, with Pierre Trudeau, Brian Mulroney, and Nixon, Bush Sr., and other international cohorts for their cooperation in the manipulation of our banking systems and economies.
Mr. President, Prime Minister Trudeau.
Yeah, hello. Mr. President. Hello. Hello. How are you? Very well. I just got back from vacation earlier this week, and I wanted to phone you to tell you how distressed I was about all this noise that is going on around the Watergate thing. I want to tell you that, as far as I'm concerned, the people here that I know have and certainly myself have great confidence and respect. And I think amongst politicians we realize how an issue like this can be seized upon and distorted. And
right. Well, how kind of you to call. Let me say that it's really a deplorable incident, and what it is like, as you know, in campaigns, people, your best friends with the best of intentions do things they shouldn't, and then you have to let them go, and it breaks your heart, but that's the way it happens.
Well, exactly, and you're quite right. The sad thing is they do it with good intentions.
That's right. And this was all such a picky-unish damn thing, but it was wrong.
Well,
but I'll tell you, we'll survive it, Mr. Prime Minister.
Mr. President.
But your call I will always remember.
Well, I certainly never forgot that you called me when I was.
We sort of have a union. We politicians have got to stick together.
Well, that's the way we got to do it, and I think we see things the right way.
Well, I appreciate it. Incidentally, I wanted to tell you, Kissinger just left. He's going over to see Lee Ducteau. It'll be announced today in Paris next week. And as soon as he gets back, I'll have him be sure that you get a report, because I know your decision on this thing is imminent. And that way we'll have a better fix on how to let you know how the thing's coming. But we do appreciate what you've done, and I'll keep you totally posted on his visit, which will be next Thursday.
Certainly appreciate that. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
How good of you to call. Thank you.
Bye.
Canada was the first country to implement the World Trade Organization for the U.S. oligarchs. They knew then what we are only finding out today. Unfortunately, there is too much to tell, but we are running out of time. The USA was the main country they had to use to destroy the people's constitutional power worldwide. One of the reasons why the oligarchs and U.S. shadow government needed to find a way to devalue the U.S. dollar was by creating chaos within the U.S. and global economies. These tactics would force the countries that the U.S. is indebted to accept a deal in order to not lose a huge portion or the entirety of their investments by agreeing in taking on U.S. debt if the U.S. finally had no choice but to declare bankruptcy, since the U.S. isn't able to repay the debts owed to them. When Trump talks about the USA having a tariff deficit blaming other countries, he is talking about the amount of debt the United States owes to countries who trade with them. July is the deadline for many of the loans created through U.S. Treasury bonds. This is also the reason there is a rush to bring in crypto as the CBDC to the U.S. before July, and by the end of this year, 2025, for other countries. The tariffs are used as a tactic to renegotiate the U.S. debt, and like in 1971, this chaos allows the rich to get richer. The huge deals Trump is claiming to be making are not about new money coming into the country, such as the deal with Japan. They are more likely to serve as a negotiation and promise to create new companies by the U.S. for Japan's data center needs, as a repayment plan to offset Japan from demanding the U.S. repayment of the entire debt or to sell the U.S. debt treasury bonds to other countries. The one thing that stops the full implementation of the WEF CBDC supported by the U.S. dollar to remain in control of international trade and to further keep the United States-controlled World Bank and the IMF intact. The most important thing to note at this time is that the U.S., Canada and the other countries cannot generate enough electricity to maintain all the data they are trying to generate and interconnect the CBDC crypto directly to the global central bank, as shown in the schematic here. The creation of the criminal crypto CBDC is so that the USA can still falsely claim being the richest and most powerful country in the world, when they are the most indebted, as well as to project themselves as the most financially stable country, so that our countries do not drop the US currency by joining the BRICS nations. These truths also help us to connect the dots as to why the oligarchy did not financially support Trump for the second term. However, since the oligarchs were not ready to launch the new world monetary system, Donald Trump had to be brought back at a later presidency to be able to finalize the crypto CBDC digital currency. Why did they do all these things? The oligarchs, the Israeli lobby, the CIA, the Brotherhood, and the WEF, Kissinger groupies, had their plans already in play prior to 1971 because they had much more to hide than the monetary theft that was about to be exposed. Therefore, they needed to be in control of the narrative over governments and the people worldwide. Their need for power and showmanship became more intensified. In 1971, they had to create many organizations to hide the reality that was truly happening to this planet, so that they could stay in control over humanity to save themselves and their families above all else. The creation of the World Economic Forum became the brainchild and funding source that the Zionist bankers and Henry Kissinger required to control governments, military, big corporations, and media. They required much planning and resources to hide the truth from every sector imaginable. This is the reality that we find ourselves in today, a reality of which most people have no clue about, that has been happening right before our eyes. Creating chaos was the perfect tool to make sure we were all too busy to notice anything else. This chaos is working like a charm. Instead of just complaining, exposing, protesting, launch legal lawsuits, the first question we needed to ask was, why? Then search for the truth as to their underlying reasons for their actions. When you see the big picture, then all pieces of the puzzle fall into place. If you can't see the big picture, you can't put the pieces together properly or fast enough before it's too little too late. Unfortunately for humanity, we are at that stage now. The only way we can know the truth is to be in charge of our governments and no longer allow our government to completely rule over us without protection from those who want to destroy democracy and our human rights, as seen at the hands of the Israeli government with Gaza and their control of our Canadian governments, and all governments appeasing the World Economic Forum oligarchs and the likes of Donald Trump and his family's Zionist ties. Please keep in mind that the true Jewish people's values are not the same as the Zionist Jews are. Be blamed for the actions of their oligarchs, or blame anyone else for that matter for their infiltrated governments, any more than we can blame Canadians for our infiltrated WEF government. Everything happening to us today worldwide was by design since the 1950s, and more so after 1971. The reality of what they knew regarding our planet and what they needed to hide from humanity gave them the incentives to manipulate the narrative to always remain in control in ensuring their own protection, power, and wealth above humanity's.
Of the earth, and there were sudden changes. We generally don't like to know that we are traveling on a accident-prone planet.
It also answers the question as to why our economies were driven into specific directions, including space initiatives, the military medical consortium of the Five Eyes involving the CIA, USA, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. These actions enabled them in enforcing the whole of government actions under military control inside our governance. This further included their deliberate implementation of the pandemic, lockdowns, removal of human rights, theft of our DNA through lies and corruption. Not to mention the forced vaccinations and lies about the U.S. military ordering the creation of the coronavirus, then blame China for it. These needs repeating in Canada, the Conservatives, Stephen Harper and Brian Mulroney, helped implement advancing these actions, and then the Liberals, Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland, And the final connecting dot to our new global crypto CBDC backed by the US dollar and BRICS monetary system is no other than Canada's, Mark Carney, and our illegal head of state, King Charles. All of our political parties worldwide are interconnected to fulfill Henry Kissinger, an ardent Zionist, along with Mikhail Gorbachev and Maurice Strong's deceitful Green Party's Agenda 21 environmental plan to hide the truth and almost complete infiltration of our governments and the United Nations via the WEF's global control of humanity strategy via private corporations and whole-of-government military control. Their actions throughout our history keeps repeating itself. Only by knowing the past and connecting the dots to there and now can we see a glimmer of what may come next. The big picture is at hand for those who have the ears to listen and the eyes to see beyond their manipulation through doublespeak. Actions speak louder than words. All the questions people may have concerning the implementations of chemtrails, otherwise known as weather modification, sun dimming, 5G, the CBDC, social credit system for control of humanity, their creation of underground cities, claims of global warming, and their manipulation in gaslighting environmentalists and humanity. But to begin to completely understand what is happening, we must start here. To manipulate the American peoples and countries worldwide, to hide the American spending blunder of selling too many bonds over the value of the gold they possessed, we would not have had to deal with the likes of two self-absorbed, pathological liars such as Donald Trump and Elon Musk to help launch the final destruction of human rights, to cause the amount of lightning chaos implemented from their Project 2025 that the Christian nationalists and libertarians have used to blindside us with brainwashing people worldwide in adoration of the MAGA cult. We might have had a greater chance of stopping the insanity that will come next in order to hide and manipulate the masses from the truth of our planet's visible destiny, which has nothing to do with humanity at all. As previously mentioned, Donald Trump was the perfect tool to launch the chaos those in control needed to create so that no one would see that they were being led to their downfall through global domination and by a new monetary system and control of humanity via the technology of the Tech Brothers corporations and AI such as Peter Thiel's Palantir, FinTech, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Elon Musk, XAI and others, and the ego and stupidity of Donald Trump and his blindsided MAGA cult. Even though people see that Elon Musk, the Tech Brothers, the oligarchs of big corporations and bankers have lost millions or billions of dollars, it will not matter as they will make money on every transaction being done worldwide, control the government data systems, and control the collection of data of every person on this planet. They will all become trillionaires. This will enable to generate enough money and workers to be able to build their above-the-cloud space stations for the wealthy once the Earth does what it was always meant to do at regular time intervals. Their deception strategy of problem-reaction solution comes into play. They hide the truth of reality and their deceit in destroying our human rights through pre-planned chaos. Therefore, chaos through war was implemented, all by design. Donald Trump was the perfect puppet to fall prey to Russia using Ukraine and Israel, committing horrific crimes against humanity with the help of Biden and Trump, the U.S. military, and their thirst to supply military modern warfare. Due to this reality, peace will never happen. Unfortunately, Canada bears the same crimes against humanity by supporting the Israeli government with monetary tax incentives for Canadians who invest in Israel bonds of up to $95,000 in 2024, an increase to $102,000 tax-free per year in 2025. Instead of providing this tax break to Canadians by not allowing Canadian tax breaks for bond investments to other countries, such as Israel, Canadian Jews and Zionists should be investing their tax dollars in their own country, Canada. What this tax credit does is no different than hiding taxes in offshore accounts to pay less taxes. Why should theft by our governments go on for the sake of Israel when our own Canadian people suffer? Adding insult to injury, our governments, no matter which political party in power, have been the pawns used in supplying military financing equipment, and artillery aid to Israel, among other things, in further controlling our education and campuses. The conservatives and liberals both support everything Israel does instead of supporting Canadians first. One only needs to listen to the speeches given by Pierre Poilievre, Stephen Harper, and Justin Trudeau. The same goes for the U.S. Both countries are guilty of supporting Israel's genocide agenda. By allowing our governments to do this, we too are deemed as guilty of allowing our country's government's participation in genocide. The theft of our rights has been continuously implemented by our own politicians in governments who have infiltrated all levels of governance against us for the wealthy. The conservatives and the liberals work hand in hand with these soulless human beings to destroy the rule of law and our International Bill of Human Rights that serve to protect us all. Without these legal protections, we have nothing to protect us against these monsters and those who fail to see the reality of their actions and inactions. So why have politicians and the oligarchs felt the need to control us through lies and deceit and totalitarianism instead of telling us the truth? Why did they decide to organize themselves against us all under false pretenses? Why were our governments infiltrated and manipulated? Why were underground cities built and hidden from us for so long? Why aren't they telling us the whole truth about the reality of global warming that involves the core of the Earth releasing methane way more than humanity can produce? Why did they start using weather modification chemtrails and sun-dimming technologies to create a ring around the planet that seems to only cause us and this planet more harm than good? Why did they feel the need to build underground cities and shelters? Did they suddenly purchase billion-dollar yachts to do as Moses? Another great question to ask is why are the tech brothers and the oligarchs in a rush now to completely get off this planet and into our Earth's the space station atmosphere? Are they simply hedging their bets to ensure their safety depending on the pending disasters of a pole tectonic shifts or damages from the planet's underground plumes?
These programs, central to NASA's Artemis mission to return humans to the moon and eventually reach Mars, have become symbols of bureaucratic bloat, soaking up billions with little tangible progress. For years, NASA doubled down on these legacy systems, banking on big, expensive government-built rockets. But after more than a decade, the results are underwhelming. One Artemis mission launched, constant delays and human lunar landings pushed to the late 2020s or beyond. This brings us to the Trump administration's proposed budget, released as a skinny preview earlier this month. The $18.8 billion allocation for 2026, when adjusted for inflation, takes NASA's funding back to levels not seen since the early 1980s, a time when the agency's ambitions were far more modest. This isn't a gentle trim, it's a surgical strike aimed at NASA's most costly programs. The SLS, Orion, and Lunar Gateway are all under threat of cancellation or significant downsizing. The cuts are precise. Space science faces a $2.3 billion reduction. Earth science loses $1.2 billion, and legacy human exploration systems are slashed by nearly $900 million. Even NASA's sustainable aviation programs are on the chopping block, and the budget eliminates funding for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility initiatives, which the administration deems misaligned. Acting NASA Administrator Janet Petro called the budget a balancing act between science, exploration, and technology development. But the subtext is clear. This is a fundamental shift in direction, one that challenges NASA to do more with less. Yet amidst the cuts, there's a glimmer of ambition. The budget includes $1 billion in new investments for Mars-focused programs, aligning with President Trump's pledge to plant a flag on Mars. This shift from moon-centric goals to Mars exploration is bold, but it raises questions about execution. How will NASA pursue such an ambitious goal with a reduced budget? The answer may lie in leaning on private companies like SpaceX. Elon Musk has long championed Mars colonization, and his Starship rocket, designed for deep space missions, could play a pivotal role. The budget's Mars funding could funnel resources to SpaceX, especially since Musk has announced plans to launch an uncrewed Starship to Mars in late 2026. This potential partnership highlights a broader trend: the private sector's growing influence in space. SpaceX's efficiency, building rockets, spacecraft, engines, and software in-house, stands in stark contrast to NASA's reliance on contractors and outdated systems. For the cost of one SLS launch, NASA could fund dozens of Falcon 9 missions or multiple Starship flights once it's operational. The contrast between NASA and SpaceX is stark when you look at timelines. SpaceX went from the first Falcon 9 flight in 2010 to landing and reusing boosters by 2015. Just 6 years. In that same period, NASA was still in the early stages of SLS development, grappling with delays in assembling its core stage. Today, SpaceX dominates the global launch market, carrying over 80% of commercial payloads. NASA, meanwhile, has struggled to translate its hefty budgets into meaningful progress. The agency's critics argue that guaranteed funding has dulled its incentive to innovate, allowing it to coast on technologies rooted in the 1970s and 1980s. The proposed budget cuts are a direct response to this stagnation, signaling that the administration believes NASA's old ways are no longer sustainable. So, what does this mean for NASA's future? The cuts could mark the end of the big government rocket era, pushing NASA to focus on high-impact research and strategic partnerships rather than building and launching its own systems. This could make NASA leaner and more innovative, much like SpaceX. For example, NASA could invest in advanced propulsion technologies or planetary science, while leaving rocket launches to commercial providers. SpaceX's Crew Dragon already ferries NASA astronauts to the ISS, proving that private companies can handle critical missions. Other players, like Blue Origin and Rocket Lab, are also advancing rapidly, offering NASA more options for collaboration. This shift could accelerate progress toward Mars and beyond, leveraging the private sector's agility to achieve goals that have eluded NASA for decades. However, the transition won't be seamless. Critics warn that the cuts, particularly to science programs, could jeopardize NASA's role as a leader in discovery. The $2.3 billion reduction in space science threatens planetary missions, while the $1.2 billion cut to Earth science could hinder climate research, a critical area given global environmental challenges. The Planetary Society called the 24% budget reduction the biggest single-year cut to NASA funding in American history, warning of an extinction-level event for some programs. Scientists and advocates argue that NASA's mission isn't just about launching rockets, it's about advancing knowledge, inspiring future generations, and tackling existential questions about our place in the universe. Slashing funding risks undermining these goals, especially if private companies prioritize profit over pure science. The broader context adds another layer of complexity. The Trump administration's 2026 budget proposes a 23% cut to non-defense discretionary spending, affecting agencies like the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation alongside NASA. This reflects a prioritization of defense and homeland security over civilian science, a move that has sparked debate. Space exploration has historically enjoyed bipartisan support, with both parties championing NASA's mission. The proposed cuts could face resistance in Congress, where lawmakers have often ignored similar proposals from Trump's first term. However, White House officials suggest that Republican lawmakers are more open to these reductions now, raising the stakes for NASA's future. Despite the challenges, there's potential for renewal. The budget cuts could force NASA to shed inefficiencies and embrace a more collaborative model. By partnering with SpaceX, Blue Origin, and others, NASA could focus on what it does best, pushing the boundaries of science and exploration. The $1 billion for Mars programs, while modest compared to the cuts, signals a commitment to bold goals. If NASA can harness the private sector's innovation while maintaining its scientific leadership, it could emerge stronger, ready to lead humanity to Mars and beyond.
Unfortunately, from their actions and greed, they have undoubtedly already proven that it's not to save humanity, but to save themselves at our expense, while they use humanity to create what they need, created for their own personal gains of survival and their being forever free.
Of the Earth, and there were sudden changes. We generally don't like to know that we are traveling on a accident-prone planet.
They want and desperately need to build larger space stations in order to succeed at getting off the planet in time, so that they can sit above the clouds watching the planet's demise. Just sit back, think, and you will understand Elon Musk's salute and the tech bros' elation at Trump's inauguration. Everything happening today is for their benefit and theirs alone. It has become obvious every passing day that our planetary system and this Earth were created as wombs carrying inner balls of gases and fire to birth suns. Our Earth is undergoing the same evolution as its twin Venus will be doing when our planet has heated up enough to ignite its twin. Once you see the research and proof for yourself, you will discover that the core and mantle magma plumes are close to penetrating the Earth, beginning with those in Siberia, Alaska, northern Canada, Greece, and Africa.
One day in the summer of 2014, a Russian pilot was flying over a remote region of the Arctic when he discovered something strange. He'd flown the same route countless times, and he always saw the same thing: trees and an endless expanse of flat, frozen Earth. But that day he saw something different: a massive crater in the middle of the frozen tundra. When he posted a video of what he saw online, it made headlines all around the world. It also confounded some of the world's smartest scientists. That's because it was unlike any crater ever discovered before it. When scientists visited the site in Siberia for the first time, they learned that it couldn't have been caused by a meteorite. They didn't find any material from outer space. What they did find, however, was debris scattered as far as a few hundred meters away. It was as if this frozen chunk of Earth in the middle of nowhere had just randomly exploded. Shortly after the first Siberian crater was discovered, scientists found another one, and then another one, and another one after that. In all, about 20 of these mysterious craters have been discovered since 2014. Recently, scientists have begun to figure out what's going on, and what they've discovered has implications for everyone on Earth, everywhere from New York to sub-Saharan Africa, because what's causing the ground to randomly explode in Siberia could dramatically change our planet. The Yamal Peninsula, where the crater was discovered, is located in northern Siberia. The word Yamal literally means end of the earth in the local indigenous language. Most of the land in Yamal is permafrost, and as the name implies, it's permanently frozen, even in the summer. In fact, the ground is so cold that in the 1950s, the Russian government built the world's largest freezer here. At the time, they had too many fish and not enough electricity to run freezers. So they built 200 caves deep within the permafrost. In 2014, scientists visited the crater for the first time to figure out what was going on. Initially, there were a few theories. The first was that UFOs had landed in Yamal and were up to something sketchy. Okay, to be honest, that was just something I read in a few comments online, but it's not that far off the most popular theory early on. According to that theory, a meteor had crashed down from outer space and tore a big hole in the ground. But scientists quickly figured out that this couldn't have happened. As I mentioned earlier, they didn't find any debris from a meteorite. The second most obvious theory was that this was just a massive sinkhole. The ground randomly collapses all over the world, including in the Arctic. So this theory made a lot of sense. But this too was quickly ruled out. While the edges of sinkholes are flat, the edges of the Yamal crater were all raised. On top of that, scientists found debris from inside the crater scattered hundreds of meters away.
Pieces of rocks and ice are flying, sometimes in quite a long distance, from 200 meters to 500 meters, and in one case it was distance to 900 meters.
All of that led scientists to conclude that a natural explosion had taken place. In order to understand what caused this explosion, it's helpful to consider the geology of this region of Siberia. In addition to having a lot of reindeer, and of course, the world's largest freezer, the Yamal Peninsula has one of the world's largest gas reserves. Under all the permafrost sit massive chambers of this stuff, 95% of which is methane, a highly combustible gas. For millions of years, that methane has been trapped under the frozen ground. But recently, things in Siberia have been changing.
Regions of northern Siberia are routinely 10 degrees higher than usual, often cracking 30 degrees.
Over the last few decades, the average temperature all around the world has been rising due to man-made climate change. But in the Arctic, temperatures are rising between 2 and 4 times faster than the rest of the world. And that's causing permafrost in places like Siberia to melt. What used to be a tight lid trapping all that methane under the ground is becoming more like a piece of Swiss cheese. And as a result, methane is slowly rising up through the permafrost. In 2012 and 2013, right before the crater was discovered, Siberia experienced a record heat wave. The average temperature in the region was about 5 degrees Celsius warmer than usual. This led scientists to wonder, did the record heat cause a massive buildup of methane right beneath the Earth's surface? Toward the end of 2014, researchers in Yamal found their smoking gun. When they took samples of the air at the bottom of the crater, they found incredibly high levels of methane. The air around us typically contains 0.000179% methane, but at the bottom of the crater, about 10% of the air was made up of this gas. This helped the scientists solve the puzzle. Today's leading theory is that during those hot summers, a bunch of methane built up in a chamber, until finally the pressure rose, and then, boom, it exploded. Since 2014, about 20 of these craters have been discovered. What was previously unprecedented is becoming much more common. And that has big implications for all of us. Because when methane makes its way out of the ground and into the Earth's atmosphere, it becomes a greenhouse gas. Over a 20-year period, methane warms up our planet about 80 times faster than CO2. But methane isn't just leaking out of the ground in Siberia. All over the Arctic, scientists are finding natural systems that are producing more methane as our planet warms up. Katie Walter Anthony is one of those scientists. She's documented lakes all over Alaska that are producing as much as 10 times the amount of methane that they used to. And it's not just methane that's seeping out of this permafrost. It's estimated that there's twice as much carbon dioxide in Arctic permafrost as there is in Earth's atmosphere. The warmer our planet gets, the more of the CO2 will be released.
By the end of this century, greenhouse gas emissions from thawing permafrost may be on par with some of the world's leading greenhouse gas emitting nations, perhaps as large as or larger than emissions from the United States, the second largest greenhouse gas emitting country in the world.
Melting permafrost is an example of what climate scientists refer to as a positive feedback loop. As humans release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, our planet warms up. As our planet warms up, permafrost melts. That releases more greenhouse gases, which in turn warms up the planet more, and so on. This warming could make all the problems of climate change much worse. It could raise sea levels and put cities like Miami and New York underwater. It could lead to worse wildfires and droughts than we're already seeing. And it could make entire regions of the world uninhabitable in the near future. But what's most concerning is that at a certain point, this feedback loop could become unstoppable. This is often referred to as a tipping point. The idea is that we might be able to bring human greenhouse gas emissions to zero in, say, 100 years. But if we cross a tipping point before then, we might trigger one of these feedback loops. And if that happens, we'd experience what's often referred to as runaway climate change. In the worst case scenario, this could make our entire world uninhabitable. After all, scientists believe it was climate change that caused the greatest extinction event in Earth's history. In other words, there's a precedent for this kind of thing happening. I see the Siberian craters as a sort of metaphor, or a warning sign. For decades, permafrost slowly melted in the Arctic, and nothing really happened. But then, in just a few years, everything changed dramatically. And suddenly the ground began to literally explode. Now, we don't know when we could reach a tipping point in the Arctic. Some scientists say that we're quickly approaching that point. Others think it takes centuries to get there. But a few things are clear. First, the more greenhouse gases that humans pump into the atmosphere, the higher our risk of reaching a tipping point. That's one of the many reasons why climate scientists say that every degree of warming matters, why every fraction of a degree matters. When it comes to climate risk, nothing is binary. Second, the decisions that we make over the next few decades will have consequences for centuries to come. Whether we choose to phase out fossil fuels or not, whether we choose to deploy clean energy quickly or slowly, whether we continue producing and eating food in unsustainable ways, all of this matters a great deal. And so much of it is still in our control. Ultimately, the question is if we'll make these choices and step up to the challenge.
This may be climate skeptics' favorite graph, and at first glance, it seems to show that climate change is just a part of Earth's natural cycle. And in some ways, it is. Earth has always warmed and cooled. But according to its natural cycle, we should be in the beginning stages of a gradual cooling trend, eventually leading to another ice age. But we're not.
We've totally broken the ice age cycle, and we're not going back into another ice age.
The reason for this is simple. We've added around 50% more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere than in previous warm periods. But this is where things get confusing. When we look back at Earth's past climate, CO2 doesn't seem to be the thing that kicks off the warming. In fact, temperatures start rising first and carbon dioxide levels follow. Every single time. So does that mean CO2 doesn't actually determine global temperature? And if not, could there be something other than fossil fuels behind global warming today? Let's get to the bottom of it. More than 70% of US citizens today agree that the Earth is warming. And that's not really surprising because the evidence is everywhere. Glaciers and sea ice are disappearing, Antarctica is getting greener, and days of extreme heat have increased dramatically. What fewer people agree on is why. Zeke Housefather is a climate scientist who's frequently in the media, including on this show. He told us the two most common arguments he gets from climate skeptics are 1, the climate has always changed, and 2, it's the sun. And the reason these arguments are so compelling is because they're right, or at least kind of right. Let's start with the sun.
So when we talk about solar cycles, there's really two different things we're talking about.
The first is the solar magnetic cycle, where the sun's magnetic poles flip. This 11-year cycle influences solar activity, including sunspots, solar flares, and very slight variations in the sun's energy output. While these fluctuations can cause incredibly minor and short-term climate effects, they don't explain the long-term warming trend that we're currently seeing today. Satellite measurements since the 1970s show that solar energy reaching Earth has actually declined as global temperatures have not only continued to rise, but actually accelerated. So for the sake of this video, we can forget about this first kind of cycle. But the other one is a lot more relevant to this conversation because it's behind the ice ages.
Ice ages for a long time were a big scientific mystery. Earth scientists didn't really understand why they occurred when they did. And it took Milankovitch, who finally proposed that it's actually due to these small changes in the Earth's orbit that happen over periods of 20,000, 40,000, 100,000 years.
And these are 3 different changes here that combined trigger ice ages by changing the distribution of solar energy across Earth's surface.
The first is what we call precession. So it's a shift in the orientation of the Earth's axis of rotation. So essentially a little bit of a wobble in how the planet rotates. And it affects the amount of summer sun that's received at high latitudes.
Then there's obliquity, which affects the Earth's tilt. As obliquity decreases, we get warmer winters and cooler summers, which allows more snow and ice to build at high latitudes. Then there's the final and most important factor, eccentricity,
which is the shape of the Earth's orbit. So how sort of circular or more oval shaped it is. And that alters the length of the seasons. Precession is on a roughly 26,000 year period. Obliquity is a roughly 41,000 year period. And eccentricity is a roughly 100,000 year period. Combination of those 3 really has a big effect on the amount of sun reaching the poles and particularly reaching the Arctic.
Arctic ice formation is especially important for ice ages because the northern hemisphere has more land, which is easier to freeze than the ocean. When ice forms, it reflects the sun's radiation back into space, which cools the earth and leads to even more ice formation. This creates a feedback loop, and eventually Earth enters an ice age. But as Milankovitch cycles continue, Earth shifts its relationship to the sun. The Arctic then receives more sunlight and melts enough of the ice over a long period of time to bring us back out of an ice age. This theory is now widely accepted as the impulse that begins or ends ice ages. So yes, sun cycles, or at least extremely long orbital cycles, do affect our climate. So how does CO2 fit into this equation? While Milankovitch cycles initiate climate changes, CO2 amplifies their effects by creating a feedback loop. When more ice forms at the poles due to slight changes in Earth's orbit or tilt, more sunlight is reflected and causes more cooling.
That cooling causes reductions in CO2 concentrations because colder ocean water absorbs more CO2. Vegetation is taking up less CO2 because it's covered with ice. And these carbon cycle feedbacks in turn lead to less carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, lead to colder temperatures, and push the Earth further into ice age conditions.
And the opposite is true when we're moving out of ice ages.
Retreat of glaciers, higher vegetative activity, warmer oceans, a bunch of different factors that combined lead to more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which itself is a feedback loop leading to more warming.
So Milankovitch cycles initiate warming, warming increases CO2, and CO2 amplifies that initial warming by trapping even more heat.
CO2 is remarkably good at trapping heat in the atmosphere, particularly the heat that re-radiates from the Earth as it's absorbed by the sun, gets blocked by CO2 molecules, re-radiated back down, and it warms up the planet, which is a good thing. If we didn't have CO2 in the atmosphere, the Earth would be an uninhabitable ice ball.
And something like that has actually happened before. During the two theorized snowball Earth periods over 600 million years ago, average global temperatures are believed to have dropped to around negative 50 degrees Celsius or negative 58 degrees Fahrenheit. The planet was almost completely frozen, with ice stretching all the way to the equator. It's likely that the Earth was only able to escape these deep freezes thanks to CO2 and other greenhouse gases. Over millions of years, volcanic eruptions gradually released enough greenhouse gases to warm the atmosphere and eventually melt the ice.
The fact that we have greenhouse gases at all is good. It's just you can have too much of a good thing.
Which brings us to today. Since the Industrial Revolution, we've emitted about 1.8 trillion tons from burning fossil fuels, and approximately 1.1 trillion tons of that has accumulated in our atmosphere.
To put that in perspective, that's roughly the equivalent of burning every living thing on Earth, or the mass of everything that humans have ever made. The pyramids, the roads, all our skyscrapers and buildings. We put that much material into the atmosphere.
Which has led to an incredibly dramatic increase in atmospheric CO2. We know that because in 1958, Charles Keeling began measuring it at the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii. This led to the Keeling curve, a daily record of atmospheric CO2 showing levels rising from 315 parts per million to about 420 parts per million. And like I said earlier, that's 50% more than at any point in the last 800,000 years. And we know this because scientists are amazing.
When ice forms in Antarctica, bubbles of air get trapped into the ice. So it's like this time capsule. All you really need to do is go in there and melt the ice and measure the bubbles, and you actually have a sample of ancient atmosphere.
So we can extend far beyond the Keeling curve and compare CO2 today with paleoclimate proxy data from millions of years ago. Maybe even more amazing is that CO2 molecules actually tell us how they were created, either naturally or by the burning of fossil fuels.
The chemistry of the CO2 in the atmosphere that comes from humans is different. It actually has this unique chemical signature of ancient dead carbon. Because we have that chemical fingerprint, we can see that increase in that fingerprint through time, which tells us that the CO2 is going up, and it's also definitely from fossil fuels and not from any other source like volcanoes or anything else.
So we know that CO2 has a powerful warming effect that has led to temperatures rising far above what they would be if we hadn't burned fossil fuels. We've already passed 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, but how much warmer is it going to get from here?
Right now, with 420 parts per million in the atmosphere, right? And we know the ice ages were like 200 to 300. We've totally broken the ice age cycle. And we're not going back into another ice age. And we know that because the last time it was 400 parts per million was a much warmer world 3 million years ago.
And when Jessica says much warmer, she means it. According to her recent study, the estimated temperature during this time, called the Pliocene, was an average of 4.1 degrees above pre-industrial levels, which is almost 3 degrees warmer than today. And beyond this, Jessica's research shows that due to slow feedback processes like the melting of ice sheets and changes in vegetation and ocean circulations, which can take up to millions of years, warming could continue to get worse even if we don't put any more CO2 into the atmosphere at all. The only way to avoid increasingly severe consequences is to stop putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, because it stays there for a long, long time.
If I burn a ton of coal, put a ton of CO2 in the atmosphere today, it would take somewhere in the order of 400,000 years for that ton to be fully removed. So the fact that CO2 stays so long in the atmosphere means it can have a really big effect on the climate as a result of our cumulative emissions of it.
But what makes today's climate change particularly alarming is not just how much temperatures are rising, it's how fast it's happening.
One thing we know from the geological record is that rapid climate change is often associated with mass extinctions. I mean, that is fast climate change doing its work and turning over the pool of living things on planet Earth.
We're already experiencing devastating consequences from human-caused climate change. And even though this is fast, we know that the climate has always changed. Can that at least bring us some hope?
Has the climate always changed? Yes, it has. And on the geological timescale, in a big way. We have had long geological times of really, really hot temperatures on planet Earth, and we've also had extremely cold temperatures on planet Earth.
But it's never happened quite like this before.
We're talking about centuries or less. And on that timescale, we don't know of any kind of natural climate change that happens that fast in the deep geological past. So this is really different from the kind of natural climate changes we see.
The fact that the climate has changed so much in the past is not something that should give us comfort, because it means that the climate is fundamentally very sensitive to small changes in the amount of energy that reaches it. And now we're changing the climate in a big way. So the argument that the climate has changed before is more of a reason to worry than a reason to assume that what's happening today is not a problem.
If we're going to continue to thrive on this planet that's experiencing escalating climate and weather impacts, we have to learn and evolve our understanding together. And that means looking at all the evidence and properly interpreting it so we can make informed decisions. But the good news here is that for the first time in human history, we actually have the technology to change our emissions and to stop global warming, and to do it in an equitable way. So please let us know, what effects are you feeling from human-caused climate change? And how will learning about our planet's past impact how you discuss our planet's future? Let us know in the comments below.
Insane pictures from Quebec. Imagine you're living on the beautiful countryside, you have a farm, you're driving down the country road and whoop, suddenly you're sucked deep into, I don't want to call that landslide, they call it landslide, I call this a massive, massive sinkhole. It looks like an asteroid has hit it or a bomb crater. Insane, insane. And it's not a small one, it's huge. The whole road is gone. So now your farm might be gone, or your access to your farm. Nearby residents have been evacuated. Thankfully, nobody was in the house when it was swallowed up. But what is this? These pictures are I always want to say groundbreaking, and then all of you laugh and you're having fun in the comments, because last time I did this with this groundbreaking new video from the 7.7 Myanmar earthquake. By the way, I put it in the end screen. You have to watch this. And this is also really groundbreaking, what has happened in Quebec. But what exactly has happened? What is this? We will find out together, guys, so stay with me. So the press says a major landslide. Again, to me, this looks like something different. Sinkhole struck Saint Monique in central Quebec in Canada around 6 a.m. local time on May 21st in 2025. It has swept away, torn that house, basically the land underneath the house. The whole farm is gone. The road is gone, and event has forced the nearby residents to evacuate. No injuries, no missing persons so far, and that is really good. But that thing has left a scar in that rural area, beautiful area. So it's big. It's estimated like 2,500 feet long. That is 760 meters and roughly 500 feet wide. That's 150 meters, guys. That is really huge. Has cut through that rural road. And public safety officials have confirmed that nobody was inside the house at the time of the collapse. But imagine if you were inside the house at the time. And I've reported recently about the sinkholes in Florida that do swallow up houses and have swallowed up residents while they were sleeping, and they vanished. Florida has a sinkhole problem. There's a sinkhole map that will blow your mind. So maybe look for my Florida videos as well. A geologist has been brought in to investigate the cause of this sinkhole/landslide. Red Cross is assisting the evacuated residents. That's a shock, right? If you have a farm nearby, you might be worried, well, will it expand? Will there be other sinkholes? I know there has been quite a bit of rain in Quebec in the recent weeks. Is that related? Who knows? But the regional spokesperson for Quebec's Public Security Ministry said it was too early right now to determine the exact cause of the landslide, but they also said significant rainfall. So approximately 1.97 inches, like 50 millimeters of rain, fell between Friday and Sunday. So not far from this affected area, only like roughly 19 miles, 30 kilometers away from this area. So they think that the landslide zone is likely to continue to expanding due to the steep slope. So probably more stuff will crash into that hole. And they also say that the soil has a high clay content. So at the deepest point of that hole, the depression reaches around 80 feet, roughly 24 meters. So it's also really, really deep. And there has been another area with a landfall that has been caused by heavy rainfall earlier in the month. In Trou de la Fée has collapsed part of the roadway and severing access between two villages there. And that road still remains closed due to safety concerns. So this is not an issue that you can wrap up and put aside very, very quickly, or just try to fill it, because it might reopen again. You fill it, it might get deeper, it might get wider. That doesn't guarantee you safety. It has happened in Florida. That big sinkhole that has swallowed a house with a man inside, they were filling it afterwards, and then it reopened again. It's now fenced off. So it's not that easy. And that's why there's ongoing safety concerns, and the officials are telling the homeowners and the farmers nearby, if you notice anything unusual, I mean, you don't want to fall into a hole like this with your tractor while you're plowing your field. They're saying watch out for cracks in the ground or trees starting to fall. They should report it then to the city immediately so that experts can be sent out to assess the situation. But in this case, with this hole that has opened, there were no warning signs. Nobody noticed anything. This just occurred. It was just like, oops, it's there. But what is causing this? I have a theory, and I'm going to tell you this theory because you heard that it's clay, that there's lots of clay in the soil. So probably the primary factor for that hole or landslide was the presence of how it's called quick clay, or they call it Leda clay. That's a type of clay that is sensitive and it can suddenly liquefy when it's disturbed. And then it leads to rapid ground failure. And such landslides are common in areas with marine clay deposits, like parts of Quebec, for example. And what contributes is, of course, the heavy rainfall, has increased soil saturation, has reduced the stability. The landslide occurred near a river where natural erosion can undermine the land. And of course, the historical susceptibility to something like this. The region has a history of similar landslides that indicates an inherent geological risk in the whole area. So overall, wherever you move, wherever you go, it might look so peaceful, but there's so many things to look out for. Earthquakes, are you in a major fault zone? Is there a tsunami risk? Are you in a region, tornadoes, hurricanes, hail, lots of lightning storms, and also sinkholes. I'll put the sinkhole video of Florida I have made too, because you all might have heard, for example, of the villages in Florida, this retirement community where they all drive around with golf carts and have their homes and their pools. It has a huge problem. A huge sinkhole problem. And I have pictures that will stun you where the sinkhole swallows up a garage or half a house. But when you look at the sinkhole map, it's all over Florida, the Ocala area. I always love this area because I have horses and there's so many horse farms. I don't want my horses to disappear in a sinkhole. And it seems when you buy a house here, you have to do a geological investigation with engineers to see if that is safe. And for your insurance, it seems you have to check that your house and everything once a year. In many, many areas, incredible, but sinkholes can happen all over the US and obviously Canada. So be careful. It's really, really crazy. It seems this is sinkhole/landslide week because I have just released a video about what's going on in Switzerland, and you can see live on camera how the mountain splits apart, how the crack opens. And for 2 days, it has already sending parts of it down, and now it's the risk this is all landing on a glacier, and it's already the risk that the mountain will bury the village of Blatten, but now it lands on a glacier, and then that glacier could break apart, and then this glacier could dam a river, and then it's an even bigger catastrophe. So this is escalating in real time right now. Everyone has been evacuated. They've been flying out cows that were hanging on a helicopter. If you want to see these not groundbreaking this time, well, mountain breaking live camera, surveillance camera pictures, check out this video in the end screen. There's so many videos. So subscribe to my channel and then check out my videos. Click on videos on my channel page so that you can watch them all in a row, because this end screen doesn't have them all. You need to watch them. Stay safe, guys. Be prepared. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Methane gas is exposed in many places due to the plumes heating up the permafrost, causing havoc from within, especially in the Arctic regions. These are not the cause of humanity heating the planet, but is part of the planet's natural evolution. These facts, now that we know the truth about what our governments have hidden for all of us, our actions or inactions will determine if we get more or less time to live on this planet. There is no fixing this. The evolution of this planet is happening with or without us. The oligarchs will soon realize they can't escape above our clouds. They assume that the Earth actions will be the same as Venus. Their assumptions about Earth's impending flip, causing a temporary chaos or an ice age, are incorrect, leaving them with nowhere to hide. As for us and the rest of humanity, time matters now, not later. Decisions will have to be made in order not to create more chaos. Remaining open-minded and in control of the situation will help us to better prepare ourselves while we get our spiritual inner houses organized to make our peace, acceptance for what is coming, no matter how long we may or may not have on this earth. We will all need to exercise more understanding, love, and compassion for all instead of creating more chaos than need be. Are there solutions to the problems we are faced with today regarding our government, their lies, and the reality that the planet has its own evolution to follow? The answer to that is yes, but only if we all work together. Although no matter what we do will not change the Earth's evolution, there are possible solutions that can help in getting us more time. Please watch and listen carefully to the videos and read the research documents. In the meantime, why not choose the right path to a better way of life and control over our own destiny as peoples and countries? It's time for the people to rise to our rightful place above our governments as legal heads of state to make sound decisions, to improve our knowledge of truth, so that we can make better informed decisions. We are all one people, a humanity in chaos that can come together for what is right. Panicking will serve nothing. Every single human being matters. All are equal. All are responsible for their actions. It's time to revive true democracy, the real rule of law as compassionate human beings in the face of reality. The time for lies, delusions, and illusions are gone. It's time to become what we truly are as spiritual human beings in the face of the real second coming. Canadians and the Indigenous peoples of Canada can no longer afford to waste any time. Neither can Canadian separatists, as they are wasting time and energy by playing into the chaos paid for and generated by those in power who need our resources while everyone else would perish. Even if a country like the USA supports their false claims of abuse for secession from Canada for separatist Canadians in Alberta and other provincially believe they can become independent, they have been misguided, as they would also be required to prove that the abuse is equal to the horrific genocide happening to Palestinians in Gaza, or even more so that the Indigenous peoples of Canada and worldwide for the countries to hold a vote at the UN to even be supported at international law. One country's interference and support to secession in order to the Canadian and Indigenous peoples' lands and resources does not make it legal. Canadians need to open their eyes to the reality that they have been used and that it's time to work together to save our country the right way, and not by half-assed ideologies planted into their heads by our governments, politicians, and oligarchs who use them. It's time to end the insanity over humanity. The Canadian People's Union, CPU, has everything you need to know to lawfully make our legal changes so that we can be better prepared and no longer lied to as the true Canadian collective heads of state. Thank you for listening, and those who want to fix our country the proper way can join the Canadian People's Union to help us stop the lies about provincial separation and the theft of our rights that our governments have perpetrated since 1982. You can join us or donate to help the CPU.ca Power Shift to Freedom movement, and by also signing the People's Constitutional Canadian Referendum at canadianreferendum.ca.